April 4th, 1977. It was supposed to be a simple, short flight from Huntsville to Atlanta. On board were 85 people. At 16,000 feet, the pilot saw a large storm ahead. On the radar, there was a narrow gap. It looked tight, but manageable. In those days, storms like this were common. Minutes later, both engines fail. The jet turns into a glider. No airport ahead, only a highway below. With no way to reach an airport, the Huntsville flight was forced to use a highway as a runway. This is the true story of Southern Airways Flight 242. Welcome to Mayday Central. Incidents like these aren't just stories, they're truths that were buried. Before you move ahead, please hit the like and subscribe button for more such hidden secrets of the aviation industry. Don't forget to press that hype button if you like our content. Let us continue our story now. Southern Airways Flight 242, a scheduled passenger flight, was destined to fly from Muscle Shoals, Alabama to Atlanta, Georgia, with an intermediate stop at Huntsville, Alabama. As per the schedule, the flight departed Muscle Shoals at 3:21 p.m. and landed at Huntsville about 3:44 p.m. Among the 85 people on the flight were many U.S. military personnel, business people, and crew members who were expecting a safe journey. The aircraft was a DC-9, introduced in 1965, primarily designed for short-haul flights. It had rear-mounted engines, which made the aircraft quieter in the cabin front, but more vulnerable to severe weather ingestion when flying through heavy precipitation. The flight captain, William W. McKenzie, aged 54, had experience of over 19,000 flight hours that proved his calm, seasoned, and trusted personality. Beside him was First Officer Lyman W. Keel Jr., aged 34, a former Navy pilot with over 4,000 hours of flying time. On this day, he was flying aircraft 242. One was guiding while the other was flying. Both were experienced. But what was waiting for them ahead was far beyond anyone's imagination. Initially, the atmosphere was calm, but gradually, the weather got ugly. By the time Southern Airways Flight 242 reached Huntsville, heavy rain started. The Huntsville ATC crew had already warned them that it's going to be some bad weather. So the decision of no cabin service was concluded. Since the journey was barely expected to take 30 minutes, one of the flight attendants, Sandy Pearl Ward, even felt the weather looked bad enough to delay takeoff. It seemed like they might taxi out and wait. But around 3:54 p.m., the flight departed Huntsville on an Instrument Flight Rules flight plan. When the sky closes in and visibility drops to nothing, pilots stop flying by what they see outside. Instead, they shift their trust entirely to the instruments in front of them. That kind of flying is known as Instrument Flight Rules, or simply IFR. As Southern Airways Flight 242 climbed away from Huntsville, the pilots estimated that everything was unusual. But on the ground, the situation was shouting a different story that no one heard. In the meantime, Huntsville Air Traffic Control spots a growing wall of heavy rain ahead and warns the crew. But inside the cockpit, nothing looked dangerous at all. The pilots were already flying through the rain, but what they didn't realize is that the system building ahead was far stronger than they could have expected. Back in 1977, most flights used Bendix weather radar, where the bright areas indicated heavy storms and danger, so the pilots were trained to stay away from those regions. As the pilots studied the radar, they found something different. A dark, narrow escape. To them, it was a small gap that seemed passable. What looked like a small opening in the storm was about to become their biggest mistake. Later investigation revealed that the crew was heavily dependent on the radar, which showed a passable path through the storm. There was a possibility that the radar system misled pilots in very heavy precipitation. Investigations showed that when the radar beam weakens as it passes through heavy storms and rainfall, the device could show a false gap. When the flight was at around 14,000 feet, the pilot got a chilling message over the radio from Memphis Air Traffic Control. Attention all aircraft. SIGMET in effect from Tennessee to southern Louisiana. A SIGMET is a message that warns aircraft about upcoming dangerous weather that could make pilots unable to control the airplane, and in this situation, pilots are advised to be at least 50 miles away from it. When Captain Mackenzie and Keel took a closer look at the radar screen, tragically, that small gap they thought they saw was not there anymore. This was not the end, but rather the beginning of a spine-chilling experience. Before they could process everything, the storm hit them. The storm hail started to slam the aircraft so badly that it broke the windshield, and the noise was intolerable.
While they were trying to escape from the storm, things got even worse.
Suddenly, the aircraft lost electrical power. Inside the cockpit, the screens went dark. With no power backup, Keel suffered due to the artificial horizon, the instrument that clarifies whether the plane is in the correct level. No power, no device. The only option left was to look outside to find a safe way. But that's another terrifying problem. They were completely surrounded by thick clouds and an unmanageable storm. Under immense pressure and disorientation, they got the call from Atlanta Air Traffic Control that they couldn't receive. Now, if we go a little bit back, around the flight departure, it can be noticed that the crew received a weather report, but it was hours old. Investigators discovered that Southern Airways had not received the automatic, updated weather information from the National Weather Service. And when the dispatchers tried to fetch the latest data, the line was busy. After a terrifying 36 seconds in total darkness, fortunately, the power came back. The engine was restored, and finally, the radio started working. Atlanta traffic suggested them to maintain 15,000 feet. That's roughly around 4,600 meters. However, Flight 242 had already dropped to nearly 4,200 meters. It meant they were much lower than they should be, and still descending gradually. This is where things completely changed, and better to say, many fates were going to change now. Hail was smashing the engine so hard that dents started to form. And then the sound changed, like the engine was dying. In the blink of an eye, the windshield shattered. Mysteriously, the left engine failed. Then, the second. Investigators found that once the aircraft entered the storm, the engine started to inhale massive quantities of rain and hail. Turbofan engines can take in rain, but hail was their actual enemy. To analyze the visible failure in the engines, Pratt & Whitney, the manufacturer of Flight 242's engines, assigned the case for detailed examination. The inspection showed that high-pressure compressor blades were bent and broken, alongside evidence of repeated surging that damaged internal components. Investigators found that huge chunks of hail may have clogged critical outlets, which ultimately led to engine breakdown. The tragedy, and the belief that the aircraft was more prone to weather-related issues, had nothing to do with the engine placement. Ultimately, the DC-9 wasn't a jet anymore. It became a glider at 14,000 feet. With both engines gone, no normal instruments, and limited control, the pilots quickly started the APU. The APU, or Auxiliary Power Unit, is a backup power generator that provides electricity to the plane, but it takes more than 2 minutes to power up. Nearly 2 minutes later, the backup power kicked in, but with no engines, still, they had a fighting chance. To be part of more real and meaningful stories like this, you can support us by subscribing and joining Mayday Central. And if you want to share something we need to know about Southern Airways Flight 242, please drop your opinions in the comments section. The nearest option was Dobbins Air Reserve Base, but it was around 32 kilometers away, though it could handle a DC-9 with full emergency services. Throughout this, ATC were fully guiding them. But here's the twist. Someone in that cockpit knew that reserve base closely. Yes, First Officer Lyman Keel was trained there as a Navy Reserve pilot. His knowledge of that base became, it's better to say, their only option. After so many hurdles, Flight 242 finally came out of the storm. But destiny had other plans. The plane was descending through about 2,100 meters with no engines working. Inside the cockpit, everything was changing too frequently. The first officer, who was flying the plane, tried to keep it stable, while the captain was running the checklists and talking to ATC. At around 4:16 p.m., the crew asked ATC about the nearest airport. The answer was no. But then the controllers mentioned Cartersville Airport, a much closer option. Keel agreed on everything, but this was the point that could have brought a far better consequence than what happened next. ATC guided them with new instructions. Turn left, heading 360. Since the plane was losing altitude much faster than expected, they realized they could not make it to Cartersville Airport. In the meantime, Captain Mackenzie looked for an open field. And then, Keel spotted something else: a highway. While they made their final call to Atlanta ATC to inform them about the highway landing, time ran out. However, later investigators found issues in the information that was given to the pilots. For example, when the DC-9 lost power and searched for an airport, ATC suggested Dobbins. Still, they were unaware of smaller hubs like Cornelius Moore Airport that were likely approachable and closer. With dead engines, Keel aimed the DC-9 toward a highway in New Hope, Georgia. Back then, there was no checklist for this, no training. The decision was made after being left with no options. In the final seconds, the aircraft cleared tall pine trees. There was a car that the pilot adjusted to avoid, but no one on Earth could have stopped what happened next. At first, when the aircraft touched Georgia State Route 92, it felt smooth, as if it might actually work. But then, it bounced, one after another, and even harder. Before it came to rest, the plane traveled another 1,260 feet, destroying road signs, utility poles, fences, trees, shrubs, gasoline pumps at a gas station store, 5 automobiles, and a truck. Among the 85 people on board, 62 were killed, 21 were seriously injured, 1 was slightly injured. Not only this, 8 people on the ground were also killed. But the story was not completed yet. What exactly happened in those last few minutes could only be revealed after the investigation. Now, things turn more intense. So before we proceed, show some love with a like and share your thoughts on the Southern Airways Flight 242 disaster in the comment section. The Flight 242 crash might look like bad fate, but deep down, it was a result of many inaccuracies. First of all, as the storm turned aggressive, ATC advised the pilots to climb higher, but that was actually not needed. To get higher, the pilots had to increase the thrust, and that resulted in more mechanical damage to the engines. The National Transportation Safety Board review reported that the flight attendants could have done more to prepare for the harsh landing. For example, they could have provided blankets, pillows, or something to cover themselves that might have saved more lives. In aviation, every tragedy teaches something. The Flight 242 tragedy reminded everyone that even when mistakes happen, safety systems can still save lives. It also taught pilots that they should never let an engine keep surging. If a surge happens, fix it immediately, because if you let it continue, the engine will eventually fail. If this story taught you something new, or you want to support deeper research and help us bring you more powerful, well-documented, real stories like this, please join our YouTube channel. Your support directly helps us dig further, verify facts, and tell these stories the right way. And tell me in the comments, which real-life aviation or survival story should we cover next? I'll see you in the next episode with another true story.